Hello and welcome to another macro video. Today I want to look at ways of getting statistical information about your text. I have some old macros and some new ones. But as with many of my macros, these macros generate information, but then it's up to you to look at that information and interpret it and then make decisions if you need to as a result. This current saga started when an editor in India asked for information on the distribution of sentence lengths. So I wrote a macro, forgetting that I already had a macro known as sententialize. Still, the new macro has some new features that the old one doesn't, and the sententialize has some features that the new one doesn't. So we've got both available. The old macro rather does a printout of Word's own readability statistics, which you can read about if you look up on the internet, I'm sure. Another macro that is an existing one that I'm going to look at is called long paragraph highlighter. So that one's going to highlight the long paragraphs in a document. And then we're going to look at three new macros. I wrote one for the lady who requested it, doing the frequency of sentence lengths, but then I thought, well, I could easily do one for word length on the same sort of basis, and then to complete the set I did one on paragraph length. So let's start with the old macros. Let's start with sentence length. And when you run that, what it does is it looks at the document to try and find out how many words, sentences, average length, and standard deviation. And it does it either on the complete text or without headings. In other words, it looks at sentences in inverted commas, which are really just headings, and ignores those. So that's the information it generates, and it's up to you to look at it and see what you make of it. But what it also then does is to produce a frequency. So it tells you in the different ranges of lengths of sentence how many there are of each. That's with headings, and then again without headings. So when it's done that, you can get it to optionally to print out the Word's readability statistics, and that's what it produced for the test that I did there. And you've got there the words per sentence at 21.7 average, and if you go back and look at the ones, I've got 18.8 for the complete text including headings, and 20.2. Part of the questioning on this is what is a sentence, because that's not entirely obvious what a sentence is as far as Word is concerned. Whether it's it's complicated anyway. Let's leave it at that. So the next macro is the long paragraph highlighter, which, as I say, it depends really what you mean by long, and there's sort of two ways of looking at it. You can either look this macro either looks at it in terms of the number of words in a paragraph or the number of sentences, and at the beginning of the macro you can either have say one is true and the other is false. It's up to you to decide what you want to use for the analysis. And it also will give you allow you to set two levels, if you like, of length. You've got what you might call a medium length, and then a sort of extra long length, and they're coloured in different ways, bright green or yellow there. And then again for the lengths here, you've got medium and mega. Okay, now the first of the new macros is the frequency, the sentence frequency. So this new macro does two things. One, produces a distribution, and secondly sorts the sentences into length. so that you can look at the shortest and the longest and see what's what. So let's have a look at the distribution that it produces. So here's our distribution that it generates. As you can see, it gives various ranges of length and shows you how many there are in each of those ranges. You can set how it works. You can set the number of columns. I call them columns, but they're actually sideways, so that's like they're rows really. So how many of the what sort of range of numbers do you get there, and the max blocks tells you how many blocks across the screen. Obviously it depends on the size of the font you're using as to how many you can get on the screen, but you can play around with that and see how it works. But if you don't like the distribution there and want to use different ranges, in this macro you can actually change it. So if I run the macro, when it starts it says allow the macro to choose the column width. So that's what it did in the first case there. It decided what was a sensible number of ranges to use, given that you've said you want roughly 30 columns in total. So if I say no, don't let the macro do it, I'm going to decide the column width. So I can say I want a column width of 4, and then it will run the macro on the wrong thing and cause a lot of problems, and let's just ignore it. Okay, so if you then want to go on to the sorting, it shows you shows the contents of the file, but sorted in terms of the length of the. So if I bring that in, where are we? Come on. Here we are. So here we go. So this is the list of the document I used with the short paragraphs with 2 words, 3 words, 4, 5. So in other words, it puts in the square brackets at the beginning the number of words in the paragraph. So there we go. So that's the longest sentence, 78 words, and going down, so you can look at those. Okie doke. So one thing to say about it though is beware large documents, because in order to produce that list of sentences in sort of length order, you've got to sort the whole document, and if you're getting to hundreds of thousands of words, then that can take a long time. And so in fact, if it's too big, Word itself will generate an error. So what I've done is to put in a limit, which I call big doc, in the beginning of the macro, and if the size of the document is more than that, then it will use a different technique, which doesn't involve actually sorting the whole document at one go, but as a result it will take even longer to run. So you just need to be careful. And the other thing to point out is that when you're doing macros that take a long time, you have to wait until they've finished. Now this macro, when it finishes, will give a beep. However, what it then has to do is Word has to reformat the document that it's generated. And although the macro has finished running, until the reformatting is finished, then you must not touch the screen, because it will crash, or it can crash Word if you click too soon. And the key question is the cursor flashing? If the cursor is not flashing, then it hasn't finished reformatting and it's not safe to touch the document. So that's a new thing I learned when I was developing this macro. Okay, having done that one, I decided that I could do a frequency of the word length. So there's the next one. So that's the same document, but showing you how long the words are, giving the distribution. And again, it sorts them it sorts all the words into length, and it lists just the longest ones, and you can specify what the longest is. I said start from 12, anything longer than 12, then list it for me. So you get a list here of the words it produces. And then I decided, well, let's keep going. Let's do the same for paragraphs, and there's the distribution in terms of paragraphs. So that also produces a file, which is over here, and so that is the shortest, and again there's the number of words in the paragraph, and then the longest down the end here. So again, you can look at the longest paragraphs and decide whether they need chopping up a bit. But obviously this paragraph is just a copy of the original, so you go back to the original. Okay, well that's about it. We've done that. Any queries? Yeah, that's it. Any queries? Drop me a line and we'll see what we can do. Okay, thanks for watching.